G'day and welcome to Choosing Your Uni. I'm Rob Mullican, and in today's episode we are talking about the 7 things you need to know before you come to study in Australia. These are 7 things that might surprise you or shock you or make you go, oh wow, I'm glad I knew that. How good is this?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Well, in this video I'm going to be showing you around Airlie Beach, which is in the heart of the Whitsunday Islands on the north coast of Queensland. This is really just such a beautiful spot, and you know what's amazing, if you get the chance to come and visit here, it's one of those places which is like hot on the backpacker travel itinerary. So as we walk down the main street, you're going to see it's full of stuff and opportunities for students to come and travel and have a good time, as well as get out on a boat and check out the islands. It's magic. So let's walk around and talk about these 7 things you need to know when you come to Australia. Well, the first thing you need to know is about wildlife here in Australia. I've actually done an entire video on wildlife, and you can find that right up there. But you know, there's this perspective that everything in Australia will kill you, because we do have some of the world's most dangerous animals. We've got the most dangerous spiders, we've got like 7 out of the 10 most dangerous snakes. If you go in the water here in the summertime, they've got box jellyfish and stingers that will kill you. And if they don't kill you, then you'll probably get eaten by a crocodile or a shark. So we have so many dangerous creatures here in Australia. But the good news for you is that whilst there's a lot of dangerous stuff here, chances are you're never going to see any of it. And in fact, if you see something like a snake here, you're going to be considered very, very lucky, because it's incredibly rare. So the first thing you need to know is that, yes, we've got a lot of dangerous stuff here in Australia, but no, it's not going to kill you, because chances are you ain't even going to see it. Want to see more about that? Check out this video. One of the other things to know about wildlife here in Australia is that the range and diversity of birds that we have in this country is absolutely extraordinary. When you come here, you'll probably be woken up in the mornings by the sounds of our cockatoos and our rainbow lorikeets and things like that, making so much noise, because it is such a diverse landscape in terms of birds. You will really, really love it. Next thing you need to know is that Australians like to make fun of each other. And so if you've got, you make a local friend here, chances are at some point they're going to want to like tease you a little bit. It's a sign of endearment. We call it taking the piss, and it's really, really common. An old friend of mine used to say that in Australia, your friends are your mates and your best friend is a bastard. And that's because we in Australia like to tease our friends. Maybe it's not the best cultural habit, if you like, but it is a true thing. We call it taking the piss. Very normal in Australia. If you've got friends, good friends, you like to tease them a little bit. And so if you have made a new Australian friend and they start teasing you a little bit, you don't need to go, oh God, maybe they don't like me. Maybe they're being cruel to me. Yes, it does happen. Unfortunately, we do have assholes here in Australia too. But for the most part, it's just this cultural thing of us liking to tease our friends a bit. Taking the piss, as we call it. And you know, like, it's like this playground. Doesn't that just make you want to be a kid again? Australians are very playful. We do have this self-depreciating sense of humour. We don't only take the piss out of our friends, we take it out of ourselves a lot too. It's a little bit hard for people to get used to, but once you are used to it, you're going to find it very, very endearing. Oh, you want to know more about making friends in Australia? I've prepared this little video for you, so click up there. Next is about the weather, because Australia is all about sunshine and beaches and surfing, right? Not exactly. In some places that's certainly true. You come up here to far north Queensland, and yes, year round it's going to be warm at least, but not necessarily great weather. There's a wet season in the tropical north of Australia, so if you're coming up to places like Cairns or to Darwin, you're going to get the wet season from about October through to March. And if you're down south, it actually gets really freaking cold. Places like Tasmania and Melbourne can be absolutely freezing. There's an expression about Melbourne, for example, about having 4 seasons in one day. You can go from having like 40 degrees and then the temperature will plunge, and overnight it'll be absolutely freezing cold. And then it'll start raining, and then, you know what I mean, it'll be windy. And the reason is because Australia is geographically not that far from Antarctica. Like, next stop south from here is Antarctica. And so we can get these really powerful weather systems that come up from the Antarctic that can be extremely cold and can change the weather really fast. So whilst, yes, generally, you'll have nice weather in many, many parts of Australia, there is such a diversity of climate here. You really need to understand the climate of the place that you're going to study. And I've done a video all about climate up the top here that you can find out more. Next up, we've got the cost of living. yeah, bad news is that the cost of living in Australia is really high. It's very expensive to live here. The good news is if you get a job when you're down here, then you're earning in Australian dollars. Minimum wage here is really high and working conditions are fantastic. But to start with, you're going to find the cost of living is really expensive. You go out for a meal or even drinks and stuff, like $10 for a beer when you go to the pub. It's pretty tough. So make sure you do get a job when you get down here. And I've got a couple of videos for you up the top. There's one here about the cost of living, and then there are more about getting jobs here in Australia. Because, about getting jobs, it's really important to not get scammed when you're down here. You know, there is this temptation to take black market under the table work where you're paid cash in hand, but it's full of risks, guys. So check out this video about getting work while you're here in Australia. Next up is slang and the Aussie accent. Obviously, if you've been watching these videos for a little while, you'll realise I've got a pretty decent Australian accent. But when you get out of the big capital cities of Australia and you go into country Australia, you're going to find the Australian accent even stronger. I've actually done a whole video on Australian slang and the accent, which you can find up there. Slang here is very confusing when you first get into it. My now wife, who I met when I was a university student, at some point I said to her, you can't be too fussy. And she said, what's fussy mean? And I said, well, picky. And she said, what's picky mean? And I said, well, like choosy. And she was like, I still don't know what you're talking about. And the Australian lexicon is full of these kind of contractions and manipulations of the English language. So yeah, you're going to find it a little bit difficult to begin with, but it is a lot of fun, Australian slang, and you can learn more about Australian slang by watching this video up here. Next, let's talk about public transport, because depending on where in the world you're from, you're going to have a very different perspective on public transport here in Australia. If you're from a country that doesn't have very good public transport at all, whether that's somewhere in parts of the Indo-Pacific or from the USA, you're going to find public transport here absolutely amazing. You're going to think that it's inexpensive and it's everywhere. But if you're from Europe, you're going to find that public transport here isn't that great. The reality lies somewhere in the middle. Public transport here in Australia is pretty good in the capital cities. If you live near one of the main transport lines, whether that's a train or a bus, getting around is actually really, really easy. The moment you're away from one of those main lines, whether you're living in a big city and you don't live near a main line, or if you're in a small regional area, public transport here isn't that great. The other thing is that by world standards, our public transport is pretty expensive, and I've actually done a video about how you can save money on public transport when you're here in Australia, so check that out. Finally, Australia is huge, like seriously huge. I've been hearing about Airlie Beach as a travel destination my entire life, and yet I've only just come here. It's not the kind of place that, as somebody from Sydney, you're going to do in a weekend trip. And that's true of basically all of Australia. You're not going to do a weekend trip from Sydney or Melbourne to Perth. It's simply too far for you to actually go. So when you are planning the travel that you're going to do, make sure you allow for heaps of time. I did have a couple that I knew up in France who said, Australia, yeah, I'd love to come and visit Australia. But the thing is, I'd need at least 2 weeks to see it properly. This is a country where you can literally drive 500 kilometres and not see a house or another car. So there's a lot of space here and you need to accommodate for that as well. That's equally true of some of our major cities. Sydney is actually one of the world's largest cities, if not the largest city in the world by land area. For you to get from the coast of Sydney all the way to the mountains is like 80 kilometres, and if you want to go from north to south, it's about the same. So even though there are relatively few people by global standards, about 6 million at time of filming, it's such a huge area and space, same as Melbourne, and it just means if you're getting around to the place, you need to allow a lot more time, which is good, because in Australia, we like to take our time and relax. Now wait! Before you navigate away, I've got a bonus thing that you need to know when you come to Australia, and it's actually about tipping when you're here, because tipping is such a hard thing all over the world, isn't it? And the great news about Australia is that people who are working in restaurants and the like, everyone is paid a proper minimum wage. So tipping here is 100% voluntary. It's up to you whether or not you want to tip. And the general rule here is if you genuinely receive great service, then you might leave a little bit of change. So for example, if you're at a restaurant and the service is absolutely fantastic, then you might, the bill is $27, you might round it up to $30. Or if it's $57, you might round it up to 60. So essentially, like, there's no expectation here that you'll be leaving huge tips. It's kind of the same if you take taxis and the like. There's no expectation here that that you need to leave a tip when you're taking a taxi or going to the hairdresser, but like everybody, like, we appreciate the gesture of having done a good job. So if somebody has done a genuinely good job, except maybe at McDonald's, you don't tip at McDonald's, then leave a few dollars. It's always greatly appreciated.